Hello, I just want to say something about the People's Voice. I know there's been a lot of people have been asking, what's happened to the People's Voice and what's the background. And I would have hoped that the director, Sean Adell, would have said something by now. But in the absence of that, I will tell you what I know, which in more recent times is not very much because, as I said on my website just recently, I've been excluded from it for a little while. So, Sean Adell is the only one that can tell you what is actually happening now. What I can do, however, is give you some background and some information that you won't know about. And I can understand donors over the last year wanting to know what's happening. Of course, I understand that. But what people may not know, well, actually, they have no reason to know, is that you're looking now at the biggest single donor to the People's Voice, far, far greater than any other contribution. And it came in this way. Sean Adell was the webmaster of DavidIcke.com. And when he became a director of the People's Voice, DavidIcke.com allowed him to go on taking a full-time salary from DavidIcke.com so that TPV would not have to use its money from donations to pay him. And when you think how long that situation continued for, then that contribution alone, paying Sean Adell's salary, was the biggest single donation. We're talking thousands and thousands of pounds that came from DavidIcke.com into TPV, in effect. And in that same period that we were doing that, Sean Adell was increasingly neglecting DavidIcke.com to the point where, until I got a new web team in very recently who are doing a fantastic job and turning it round very quickly, but until that point, DavidIcke.com and David Icke Books were heading towards a situation where they were going to cease to exist in the not too distant future. And all the work that I've done, all the effort, all the abuse, all the ridicule of the last 25 years, quarter of a century, was going to, in effect, come to an end. And that contribution to TPV by paying the director's salary while getting increasingly nothing back for it was only part of the contribution. When, in the run-up for TPV going on air in November 2013, I asked for monthly donations of £1, £2, £3 to meet running costs. I knew, I must be mad, well, they say I am. I knew where the vast majority of those monthly donations to TPV would come from. They would come from people moving their subscriptions to DavidIcke.com over to TPV. And that is exactly what happened. I mean, I knew it would. But I did it anyway, to try to make TPV work. Not for me. I've always said that I would work full-time for it until March 2014, and then I had to get on with my work, my own work. it was done to give a platform for information and to give a platform to other people. So DavidIcke.com, David Icke Books, provided enormous, the biggest contributions to TPV in Adel's wages and in money that was lost to DavidIcke.com, to the point, because DavidIcke.com has such a massive traffic that the cost of running it is enormous, and therefore the loss of that money was one of the contributing factors to DavidIcke.com facing the end in the face, until we've now turned it around very quickly with decent people involved. Then I heard by accident, relatively recently, that Sean Adel was running the TPV website off the DavidIcke.com servers, and thus DavidIcke.com was paying for that as well. And then I moved to London, to Wembley, for 6-7 months, staying in Richie Allen's spare bedroom and meeting the living costs of 2 places. Again, that ran to an enormous figure over the period of time with everything thrown in. Now, put all that together and you are looking at a very, very large sum of money that went from here to the People's Voice. And when people who donated are saying what's happening and what's this, what's that, well, as the biggest single donator, I'm with you. I want to know these things too. But let me give you some background, because there are people like a brief presenter called Sonia Poulton who are seeking to use TPV to destroy me and my work. I'll get to that as we go along. The irony is that she did take money in wages from TPV at the time she was there, and she's attacking someone who, as I've just explained, not only donated all that money by various means, but in all the time that I was there, paying my own expenses, living in Richie's spare room, I never took a cent from TPV. I was the only full-time person there who did not receive a cent, the only one. And the irony is, in this inverted, insane world, that having done all that, you end up getting painted the villain. Unfrickin' believable. But having observed the world for 25 years and noted its extreme level of madness, maybe it's not unbelievable. So, let me give you some background to TPV and how we got to where we are, as much as I know about where we are now. I had the idea in, I think it was May 2013, to try to create a media platform that would allow suppressed information across the range of subjects to be communicated 24 hours a day. So it wasn't just covering Europe and Britain, it was covering the United States and the entire world. And I did this after reaching a point of giving up, really, on ever getting this information out through the mainstream media. So the idea was, well, let's create our own then. And like I said earlier, from my point of view, the idea was for me to help get it started, and then in March 2014, go back to my own work, because I'm preparing for the Wembley event, and that's 10 hours of information, and my goodness me, it takes a long time to do. You can't do other things all the time and pull that in as well. And the last thing I wanted to do was to spend the rest of my life involved in a media organisation. You know, I work alone, that's what I do. And my goodness me, I will from now on, I tell you, after my experience, which I'll get to. My role in TPV has been content. It was from the start. And I can tell you, when you have a blank sheet of paper, as I started out with, and 24 hours a day of programming, 7 days a week ongoing to fill it with, then that's a massive task in itself. Sean Adel ran the, if you like, the business side of things, and with others who came in and were employed. And I was the director of TPV with him for a short time, and then stood down. And you know, what's happening, and I'll get to this, but what's been happening with TPV is people with great malevolent intent have been machine gunning allegations in all directions, and knowing that for some people, naive people, that they would stick. And they'd be, oh no, there must be something. Well, it was like, oh, why has he stepped down as a director? Well, here's why. We did not intend from the start to come under the regulator in Britain, the media regulator called Ofcom, because we were an internet station, and thus it's a very grey area. It still is, about whether Ofcom has regulation over internet stations, but it's claiming it does. And it was an organisation created by Tony Blair, so you know that's how bad it is. And there was a guy came, I think his name was Welsh, and he went off on one. He was a volunteer. He was asking for some expenses to do this or something. I don't really recall it. I wasn't involved in it, but that's what I'm told. Anyway, he threw his dummy out the pram and off he went, and then has been trying to damage the station ever since. I think from the moment he got home, really. Anyway, it seems that he and others actually contacted Ofcom and said, what about this TPV? They shouldn't be doing this without your regulation. And then when Ofcom, as a result of all that, contacted us, we had to come under Ofcom regulations. Otherwise, we would not have gone on air. They would have stopped that. And given that people had donated, that was not going to be an option, not going on air. And then the same bloke who kind of said to Ofcom, what about this? Then criticised us for coming under Ofcom regulations. So I tell that little cameo story because that is the extraordinary mentality of those who have worked so hard to bring TPV to an end. And if they'd only give a fraction of that to making the world a nicer place and a freer place, then we might actually get somewhere, but that's not where they're coming from. Now, as a result of coming under Ofcom regulations, one of them is that a director of a media company cannot appear on air and be a regular contributor. And as the whole idea of the People's Voice was to put out suppressed information. For me, after a quarter of a century of researching it, to be barred from actually appearing on the station was ridiculous. So I stepped down so that I could appear on the station. There's also been a question, which I completely understand, of why the People's Voice was set up as a private limited company. Well, this is the reason. The idea from the start was to create a non-profit foundation or trust. And accountants were asked to set that up. However, what happened is they came back to us and said, well, we can set it up, but the rules say that if you are a non-profit making trust or foundation that is receiving the tax benefits of that, then you can't be political. And if you can't be political in the widest sense, there was no point in TPV's existence. So we were left with the worst of all worlds. That was a company that was private limited, which is the only way we could be political, the accountants told us, and had none of the tax benefits of being non-profit, even though we were non-profit. And the business rates at the Wembley location alone was something like 32,000, maybe a bit more, a year. And being a non-profit foundation would have saved us that. So no one wanted to be that more than me. And so we started putting the People's Voice together. And it was a fantastic achievement. Because of the donations in the summer of 2013, we, one, needed to get on air quickly to justify that. And B, all the time we weren't on air, the potential for raising money in advertising and sponsorship for running costs was being lost. So we had no choice but get on air as quick as possible. And the achievement was fantastic. To take a battered room, or two rooms, and turn that into a television studio and newsroom and a production site for a long list of self-created productions, including the band, which gave musicians and comedians a stage to be seen, who most of them wouldn't get that stage otherwise, and I know that it's benefited their careers of a number of them greatly. And we were doing all this and were achieving what we set out to achieve. And the running costs to achieve that were massive. I mean, when you take into account that the system, the computer system that played the programs out, and without which we couldn't have done what we did, because you can't do an operation like we were doing, 24 hours a day of programming, and not have it much of it automated, the non-live stuff. That, plus turning a battered room into a television studio, and then all the equipment that went with it. I mean, there you're talking, from what I saw, you're talking up in the 80,000, 90,000 pounds just for that, before anything else. And when we went on air in November 2013, I think it was the 25th, the monthly running costs for wages of full-time people, but not me. The cost of rent, the cost of business rates, the cost of power, the cost of all the streaming of the programming 24 hours a day. That was running at £50,000 a month. And clearly, you couldn't go on like that unless you brought in advertising and sponsorship. And without that, nothing was going to keep TPV on air for that long. I'm amazed it actually got as far as it did into July 2014. But the crucial thing was we needed sponsorship and we needed advertising. And the situation was that the crucial time in the life of TPV that was going to decide if it was going to go forward or it wasn't was the period immediately after we went on air, from November, December, January, February in 2014. And TPV has not made it because that advertising and sponsorship was not forthcoming. And therefore, every month, to keep the station going, more money was going out than was coming in, and that can only end one way. And that's why we had to take the live programming down, Richie Allen's show, because the live programming was the most expensive. You need producers, you need people that are going to run the show, and they're working full time. So that had to go. And eventually this process of more money going out than coming in, like I say, was only going to end one way. So why didn't we get the advertising and sponsorship? Well, two main reasons, especially in that crucial time I spoke about. One is the information we were putting out. When you are challenging a system that serves companies and businesses that have the kind of money that can make substantial contributions to advertising and sponsorship, when you're challenging the system on which they prosper, well, they're not really keen on sponsoring you and giving you advertising and supporting you. And so we were left with small alternative companies, overwhelmingly, that don't have big advertising budgets and do not have the money to make major donations and sponsorship. But there was another reason, and I want to come to that. At that crucial time, across the new year, 2013, 2014, a campaign of unbelievable malevolence, mendacity, and vitriol was unleashed against TPV and people who work there. And this is how it came about. Sonia Poulton became a presenter of one of the programs on TPV. She's a freelance journalist who's worked in the mainstream media. And she didn't come full time until, well, couldn't be much more than 10 days or so before we went on air in November 2013. And she was all smiles and all that stuff up to that point. And for a little while after the start. But then, not just me, but many other people started to notice a pattern. And it was one of producers on her program leaving, staff being upset at the way they were treated by her. And it became more divisive when we did a telethon just before we went on air. This was, and because she was not working full time but was doing her other work, she was not asked to present it. Richie Allen, who was working full time, presented it for obvious reasons. Now, Sonia Poulton then refused to appear on that telethon, making some excuse about one of the guests, Peter Tatchell, shouldn't have been on the show. But, you know, anyone with a brain looking on saw that she was miffed about not being the presenter. And then it became more and more divisive and more an unpleasant place to work. When you have a situation, for instance, where the presenter of a program is telling her team to have nothing to do with the team of another presenter's program because they didn't like him. When you have presenters, complaining that I am doing a paper review every day on another person's program, and therefore that program would get a bigger audience than theirs, then you start to see that you are not dealing with someone who is putting the information and the ethos of the station first. There is another agenda. Anyway, it carried on, and people were trying to, you know, keep things going and, you know, keep the conflict as less as possible, although the atmosphere was horrible. I mean, there were some very, very nice, genuine people that worked at TPV. But I got to tell you, I have never come across personally more poisonous, self-obsessed, mendacious, manipulating people than I came across in one place at the People's Voice. Anyway, things came to a head when we had another telethon at New Year, last New Year. And it was 5 hours, as I recall. And the first 2.5 hours was Richie Allen. And the second 2.5 hours was presented by Sonia Poulton. The first 2.5 hours of Richie's contribution was bright, it was quick, it was interesting, and it was very, very positive, very upbeat. But then Sonia Poulton came on, and from my point of view and the point of view of people who were running the station, the show became akin to watching paint dry. It was just four people just talking, and that wasn't what the telethon was supposed to be about. There's nothing wrong with that if you're discussing things, but that wasn't what the telethon was about. And you know, it got to the point where, you know, how long is this going to go on? So it was then decided, and the producer decided, that there was some moving pictures, a report that Sonia Poulton had done, that was supposed to go into that show at one point. So the decision was made, look, you know, we can't go on and on and on like this interminably. So let's pull the moving pictures report up and play that earlier. Well, Sonia Poulton, shall we say, was not having it. and screamed at the producer and the head of production and informed them that if anything was changed, she was walking out in the middle of a live show when we're trying to raise money to keep the station going. And clearly, that level of diva behavior is not acceptable. So the weekend passed, and then when Sonia Poulton came back in, myself, Sean Addle, and our head of production, Liz Roberts, got together with her in the studio, actually, where the band was made, which is, it's not lit. There's no big light. It's all small lights for the band. And this is the infamous "they took me into a darkened room" childish nonsense that came from Sonia Poulton later. Anyway, it was pointed out that her behaviour during the telethon was absolutely not acceptable. At which point she started throwing allegations about money and where money had gone. And she was asked, all right, well, give us your evidence and let's look at it. It's on me phone. And we never saw it. Anyway, at this point, and by the way, there was no going on about money or anything like that before she was called out for her diva, outrageous behaviour. And not only that, her outrageous treatment of people. And so she walks out, and the campaign of vitriol against TPV and people who work there was ratcheted up in earnest. And immediately her intention was to destroy TPV and me. And within a day or so of her leaving, in that big walkout fashion, the TPV operating system, which was computerized, was hacked over and over and over again, taking the station off air, sometimes for long periods. And it's extraordinary, the people who did that will be people who say we must get the information out. Oh, please. So I know, let's take a station off air that's doing that. And you know, whatever people may say about the People's Voice, it put out something like 5,000 hours of suppressed material, 24 hours a day, month after month. And at a time when even the idiots and the deniers are struggling to dismiss the fact that this world is going down a very dark and dangerous road. To work so hard to destroy a station, and in this case take it off air, to stop information exposing that to coming out, that is, in my view, a severe form of mental illness and schizophrenia. The emails, I'll tell you what we had to deal with. The emails of the People's Voice were hacked into. And I'll give you an example. There's an agency in London which provides television staff and media staff for stations. So if you need someone to fill a job, like a backroom job, then you go to them, and it's an agency to find people. Those that hacked into the TPV emails then started sending abusive emails to this agency, to the point, obviously, the agency thought it was coming from TPV, and basically they said, no more. And that was just part of what we were facing. They went to advertisers. Some of them were abusive to advertisers, but they went to advertisers urging them not to advertise with us. And as a result of that, a number of advertisers, well, don't want to know then. And then you had, of course, all the abuse at the station, and advertisers were going, oh, I'm staying out of that. So ironically, these people who are going, well, yeah, what happened and all that stuff, the vitriol people, were fundamental in denying TPV the income lifeblood that would have gone on to fulfill and carry on what we did fulfill at the start, which is what we said we would. And you know, some of it was almost funny in an ironic sort of way. Do you know that one of the people who was abusing the station and abusing individuals, including members of my own family, was a man called Lee Ryan. This is Sonia Poulton's boyfriend. Lee Ryan is a convicted car thief, been to jail for it. And he is best known for winning £6.5 million on the national lottery and blowing it all on himself in just a ridiculously few years. And this guy's going, what happened to the money? Yeah, what happened to the money, Ryan? Ferraris and mansions, wasn't it? We had people, there was a lady called, I think her name was Sharon Gifford. Someone painted a picture of me. It's up there, big picture. And very kindly, and they gave it to me, and it was just on against the wall in my office. This Sharon Gifford, who worked on Sonia Poulton's program for a while, had to be restrained as she stood at the lift with the painting under her arm. I wasn't there at the time. Announcing she was going to go and set light to it. I mean, you really couldn't make up some of the people that came and thankfully went. And you know when you're in one of these amusement arcades, and you know those things where there's a hammer and heads come up and you have to hit that and then another one comes up. It was a bit like that. You know, we had people who would leave and slag everybody off, and people who were still there would go, well, that's terrible. That someone who took money from the station was paid and treated nicely, and now they go off and they're trashing this. And then a few weeks down the road, the people who said that would go and do the same. It's extraordinary. When you've got forums and websites just set up to trash people and the station, it's just extraordinary. I mean, have these people seen the world? Have they seen what's going on? And they talk about, oh, what about all the abused children? Yes, what about them? What about them? The self-obsession and the me attitude was shocking. Like I say, there were some lovely people there who did have the ethos. But I used to sit there and look around that office and see the behaviour, see the Poultons and the Elisa Hawks and others in their little clique plotting. Oh, shh. What about her? And I thought, this is supposed to be an adult station acting in a mature way. And in so many cases, not least Sonia Poulton, it was like dealing with a child who'd yet to get through the terrible twos. Yeah. Sonia Poulton and her groupies embarked on a campaign to destroy TPV and to destroy me. And all these months down the road, Sonia Poulton's legendary capacity for resentment apparently has led her to be putting together a Icke expose called Unmasking the Messiah. Now, just take that, Unmasking the Messiah. That is straight from some tabloid crap, which she says she's against. So, Unmasking the Messiah. She's going to try to damage me maximally because her need for revenge and the hatred in her heart for someone who actually faced her up and said, your behavior is not acceptable, because most people are intimidated by her and wouldn't do that. Her hatred and need for revenge is leading her to try to use TPV to destroy me and to paint me as some kind of ogre. He's not like he seems. Well, neither are you, darling, unless you see yourself close up. And she's going around talking to people, and when people from TVV are approached and they say, well, actually, no, I thought it was a nice place to work, and I thought David Icke was a nice bloke. They don't get in the film. And it's being put out through an organisation called the Community Press Group. It's based in Potters Bar, north of London, which is headed by a police officer, or a career police officer, called Dave Eden. And the Community Press Group was created in the same period that the People's Voice was created, and now runs its operation under this guy, Dave Eden, and with Sonia Poulton is promising that they are going to unmask me. In other words, they are going to attempt to cause me maximum damage and, hope of hopes, destroy me in what I do in terms of my ability to continue. Now, say what you like about me, and most people do. I was doing this when almost no one else was doing it. Over the last 25 years, I have taken scales of ridicule and abuse of historic proportions. One guy. From the days of not being able to walk down the street without virtually everyone in the street laughing at me. From the days when it was impossible to go into a pub because there was uproar and ridicule. When you did talks at universities and it was 15 minutes on one occasion before I could start speaking because of the abuse and the ridicule coming from the audience. From that time, we've moved through to now, yeah, ridicule still, but far less because what I've been writing about is happening. But now to abuse. My family have been abused. My kids have been abused by journalists following them to school, by people on the internet and what have you. And through all that period of 25 years of it, I've kept going. And you will not understand what it has been like to be the focus of such extraordinary levels of abuse and ridicule over a quarter of a century. And you won't know what it's like because you have to experience it to know what it's like. And almost no one else ever has in the extremes and the time scale that I have. And through it all, I've kept going. My God, the times I just wanted to walk away and disappear. But you can't. Because when you know what the plan is, and you look, kids, young people, and people who are not young, and you realize what's coming and what their lives will be like, especially the kids and the young people, giving up is not an option, because you can't live with yourself if you did. Well, I couldn't. So I've been knocked down and knocked down and knocked down and knocked down, and you keep getting up and you keep moving forward, and somehow you do move forward. And we've reached the point now where, because of all the information that I put out over the years, which was overwhelmingly met with ridicule and abuse and dismissal when it went out there, things are happening in the world, like the political paedophilia revelations that are happening in this country. They were in my books years ago, like The Biggest Secret in 1998. People are now starting to say, well, hold on a minute. Let's look at what else this guy has said. And we're starting to see the cracks, starting to see some encouragement, some hope that this wall of oppression and secrecy would be breached fatally. At that very time, Sonia Poulton and the community press group headed by this former policeman, Dave Eden, are planning to do their damnedest to destroy me and what I do. Who benefits from that, Ms. Poulton? Who benefits from that, Mr. Eden? Who benefits is the very system you two claim to be challenging. Emphasis on the claim, by the way. And in the last few weeks, I probably came as close as I've ever come to saying, all right, I'll leave you to it then. All the best. I'm going to live out my life quietly. Do what I want to do. Do some things for me for a change. So freaking tempting, because I could do it, but I won't, because I started a journey 25 years ago, and I'm bloody well gonna finish it, and it will only end when I do. But I am sickened that people who claim to be fighting for justice, fighting for the oppressed, are so full of hatred, hostility, and the need for revenge that they would try to damage as best they can someone who has done more to alert the world to what's really going on than almost anyone else on the planet. And compared with their contribution, I've already done more to alert people to the truth of the world on so many levels than they, Eden, Poulton, the Poulton groupies, and all these other abusers will do if they live to be 1,000. But that's what you're dealing with. Frauds and fakes. And it will massively backfire. So when you have been the biggest donator, massively so, to the People's Voice, when you had the idea to create it, when you gave 6-7 months full time to it, and never took a cent for my trouble, then you end up being painted the villain. That is, if we needed it, still further confirmation that the world is bloody insane. Bloody madhouse. Let me make through these notes. I wanted to cover everything. I talk about banging the heads up as they come up. There's always someone. Well, that's gone on right to the end, because I came back home on March the 1st, as I said I would from the start. And my goodness me, it's a bloody good job I did, because DavidIcke.com and related operations were in a poor state due to neglect, not least on behalf of the webmaster, as was. So I've been working with a new web team to turn everything around, and it's just been fantastic. It's turned around really quickly, and we're going to go on doing it because it's being loved again. It's being cared for again. It's being focused on again. But I have been watching from a distance and having me two penneth here and there when I thought it was necessary. And a bookkeeper, a part-time bookkeeper, was appointed right at the start. A person I knew had great integrity. And very diligent, very honest, outstanding. And then I heard that she'd been fired by Sean Adler. This was a few weeks ago now. And I pointed out that wasn't acceptable, and where you're going to go from here in terms of bookkeeping. I then received an email back, which was at the bottom, it had his name, Sean Adler, but had clearly not been written by him, was actually been written by his marriage partner, a guy called Sinclair. And since that partnership, Sinclair, who's from America, has been given more and more influence at the People's Voice, even appearing on Richie Allen's show. I don't know why, because the guy is absolutely clueless on the information that TPV was set up to communicate. And it was only going to end one way. with someone who had no idea about the media and no idea about the information that TPP is there to put out. It was only going to end one way. And I got this email, it was clearly written by this Sinclair bloke, saying that actually Sean Adel owned the company. It was his company. Well, it wasn't. He was a custodian, and that was known all along. He was only a director because the company had to be set up like that for reasons I've explained. He was a custodian. So I got this, and it was that, basically, you're not having any say anymore. And at that point, clearly I had to point that out to people, which I did on my website, because I could see where it was going with this Sinclair bloke having so much influence. And I must say that I've known Sean Adel a long time, but I don't know the Sean Adel that I've seen in the last few weeks since that marriage happened. So I don't know. Maybe you can explain, but I'm not the only one that's seen it. So we come to this point, and I know as much as you do. I understand that he's put the TPB into liquidation, but only he can answer those questions. I'm from a distance now, and there has been lots of allegations that money was here, money was there, or whatever, and like it's the machine gun approach. I mean, when you've got a situation where I've been accused of using TPV to fund my cocaine habit, when I actually don't have a cocaine habit, and I have never written a single check for a single penny or moved any money out of the TPV bank account. Even once. Never. Wasn't my area, wasn't my role. My role was content. But they fire these things at you. Another moronic man who needs psychiatric help said that I used the money to buy a house in Islington. Well, even with the donations that TPV got, you don't buy a house in Islington for that kind of money. It's madness. So there's this machine gun approach. But I'll say this. If anyone, including Poulton, has any evidence that money went to where it shouldn't have gone, not innuendo, not I've heard, evidence, this is what they need to do. They need to take it to the police, and they need to seek the prosecution of the person involved. And no one will back them more than me if they produce that evidence and take it to the police. But instead, what's happening is that the need for revenge and the need for their hatred to be expressed means that they're just trying to focus it all on me, the guy who never took a penny and put thousands and thousands in to support it financially. Why? Well, I'm the best known person there publicly, so therefore, that's a motivation. Motivation for Sonia Poulton is that I called her out as a diva, and that you don't do that, I must destroy him. But are there any other reasons? Are there any other reasons to try to undermine and destroy the work of someone who is actually exposing, at the very cutting edge, exposing what's happening in the world at a time when so many people in power want me out of the way? Worth asking, I think. Let's just see if I think we're nearly there now. No, that's it. So I say to the people that donated, in fact, I'm saying to myself as the biggest donator, thank you for supporting People's Voice. And when we went on air on November the 25th, 2013, we were fulfilling virtually everything that we said we would within months of saying it. It was an extraordinary achievement. But once the vitriol and the campaign of abuse and attempts to destroy it started, it was in a death spiral, which, barring some person coming in and saying, I'll sponsor this, sponsor that, was going to end like it's ended. But, you know when people are putting the greater good first. Because no matter what happens, no matter how they get kicked down, they get up and carry on. No matter how they don't like something that's happened, they get up and get on. When you are not putting the greater good first, but you're just claiming that while using the alleged greater good to benefit you, what happens then is when something happens you don't like, you want to destroy the subject of that, even though it's doing great work for the greater good in terms of communicating suppressed information. And again, I've seen that at the People's Voice, where people, oh yeah, we've got to do this, it's great. I mean, you know, on the 2 days before Sonia Poulton unleashed this campaign of vitriol against me, she was on air going, oh, David Icke, he's wonderful, that's on air programs. But when the greater good is your prop, not your prime focus, then you don't say, okay, it didn't work out, I didn't like what happened, but hey, they're putting out information 24 hours a day, you know, all the best. You don't do that, you want to destroy it. But when the greater good is your focus and something disappointing happens, like what's happened to the People's Voice, you say, okay, what now? And I could walk away easily and say, oh, finish with it. But we are seeking to put together something that will put out live information 5, maybe even 6 days a week, which will not require any donation, which will be self-funding, self-operating, and will be run by a tiny few people, tiny, all of whom have the ethos that the greater good comes first. And my God, what a change that will be from what I experienced at the People's Voice. And I would just finish like this, and say this to Sonia Poulton and this Dave Eden chap and all the others involved. Hate always destroys the hater, not the hated. And in trying to damage me after all that I've done over 25 years, when you were nowhere to be seen, any of you, still aren't really, chasing politicians down the street, screaming at them, crikey, that's great journalism, that would change the world. You are unmasking yourselves, ironically, given the title of what you're calling it. You're unmasking yourselves because you're showing the real you and your real motivation. And my God, it's not pretty. Me? I started a journey 25 years ago, and I'm going to finish it. and no one, least of all a diva, is going to stop me. Because those with intelligence will see through you and your motivations, and those with no intelligence will not, but they will not be interested in my information anyway. I hope this is giving you some background from which you can see the TPV story from another angle. Pity, but life goes on, and my goodness, my work goes on. See you soon. Bye.